How are you?
Hi, Trae. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been too long. And every time that you come on, you're informing me. So I know you're here to inform us all. Tell us some of these basics about the Michael Rowland case.
Yeah. So in April of 2022, King County released or had a press release indicating that they found a 63-year-old man unresponsive in his cell minutes after being booked. It wasn't until December of 2022, after some intense investigative reporting by Sydney Brownstone, that it was uncovered what really happened. So Mr. Rowland was an unhoused community member. He was downtown. He'd gone into a hotel and he'd been demanding food. It was clear he was in a mental health crisis. Instead of giving him care and the resources that he need, SPD responded and they held him down in the same position that George Floyd was killed in. They had a knee on him. And then instead of giving him the resources he needed or taking to a mental health facility or giving him treatment, he was taken to the King County Jail. And King County jail guards did the exact same thing. Minutes later, he was found dead.
Wow.
Yeah.
This right here is, it's unfortunate, Sade, that we just keep seeing the persistence of these kinds of tactics ending in death.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that's the coldest part about all of this, is that we keep on experiencing it. And even when you have officers going to jail, going to prison for murder, essentially, you still see that there's officers who are utilizing these same tactics that lead in death. What happened once it was uncovered that was really what happened to Michael Rowland?
Well, it hit the media, and we do want to talk about how King County jails hit the media nationally as well, for a number of different reasons, and we'll get to that too. But, I know that the family has obtained representation. I know that there are actions being taken in the community as well.
Yeah, as we get informed, we want to do something, say something, adjust ourselves, be a part of the larger discourse around this. I think anytime we see these kinds of injustices, there are many people who are willing to step up to the plate. And I appreciate that you're bringing this to light for the audience here so that we can really be engaged and informed now about what's going on. But, you're saying there's also these things that are constantly persisting in the King County Jail. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So, if we talk about a national discussion, King County Jail suicide rate is 8 times that of the national average, which is just, there are no words for that. The harm that's being done in the King County Jail, in the 6-month period between November 2021 and May 2022, there are 500 incidents of use of force, assault, and critical incidents in the King County jails. And so our community members, when they're being arrested, and we have to acknowledge who's mostly being arrested, right? It's mostly Black and brown people, Indigenous people, and people are impoverished, are being taken to the jails. They're being abused while they're in the jails too. And for the simple fact that they can't afford bail, because the system has determined that if you're rich enough, you can get out of jail. But if you're not, you have to stay. And you're subjected and your life is put at risk. So Mr. Rowland, in his situation, there was no report that he put anybody in danger, right? He needed food, he needed assistance. And instead of giving him the care, he was literally killed. And I'll say that with no hesitation. But for the actions of SPD, but for the actions of King County jail guards, he would still be alive.
Sade, I mean, this is one of those things where I think a lot of people hear these kinds of things and they go, my goodness, what can be done to disrupt this? I'm so glad to hear that the Rowland family is seeking counsel, that they are moving something forward in regard to this case and their family member who now is gone. But I think about the future Michael Rowlands, right? I think about the idea of, Black men oftentimes being the ones, you said it, Indigenous men, Hispanic men, like we see it over and over again, really hitting particular ethnic groups in large numbers. And we also understand too that there's a disparity in terms of who finds themselves there. You just said it, in terms of those who are impoverished, those who don't have the money to just make bail, they have to stay there. I know that there were some things that we're working on that were a while back now, it seems like, after George Floyd, where it was like, well, what can we do to mitigate all of that so that even if you can't afford bail, there's other things that you can do so that you don't have to stay there. But it just hasn't hit the airwaves yet. It just hasn't hit.
Well, in 2020, it's interesting, at the State of the County speech, Dow Constantine acknowledged, and it was reported all over the news, that, it's time to shut down the King County Jail because of all of the issues. And not just because the facility is old, but because of the harm that's being done in the facility. Any type of jail you get, it doesn't matter how new the building is. It doesn't matter how many cameras you have. Just like with policing, right? We got body-worn video. People are still dying in mass. And so we need to start talking about results. We can't do empty reforms, right? We have to start talking about changes that are actually going to be people-centered, and shutting down the jail is where we need to go.
Yeah, then folks that are for police, or that think, hey, we still need these spaces. How do we get them to understand that the harm that's being caused actually is not, like it's too insurmountable at this point, right? I mean, you're talking about 8 times the national average. That is alarming, and everybody that is within King County should care about this. It doesn't matter if they have family members who are affected by this. Everybody should care, because that's something that is causing a real stain on the King County name. And, we are the only Martin Luther King Jr. county in the nation, right? We got to try to be setting a different standard. How do we hold Dow Constantine, accountable to the things that he said back then? I mean, what are some of the things that you foresee people can do now? Because, I mean, it sounds like these issues are persistent.
Yeah. So as far as what people can do now, keep pressure on electeds, right? Inform your community members, inform your family members, those dinner time, talks and at tables, they can really be helpful. But again, put pressure on your electeds. He literally made a public statement saying the King County jail should be shut down. If he'd followed through with that, Mr. Rowland would still be alive. And we should talk about, when people talk about, needing public safety, and that's usually what people refer to when they're saying we need police. It's like police and public safety are two different things. If you look around the world, right, we are doing what no other nation on the planet has ever done and will ever do. We have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prison and jail population. We invest in caging people when other nations invest in resources and housing, and they have less crime and less harm done to people. They have better education systems. And so if we really want to keep people safe and we want to keep each other safe, we have to fund and resource them. That's really just what it is. So, when we talk about a housing first model, when you get people off the streets, when you get them the care that they need, when you invest in them, the King County Jail, the county spends, $200 a day per person. That's $73,000 a year. You would never see people again if you invested that type of money in them, right? Students in Washington State, it's $11,000 a year per student. $73,000 a year to be caged in the King County Jail. It makes no sense. And so what are our priorities? We want to invest in our people and our community and safety and a future that we can all be a part of, or do we want to keep doing the same thing that we've been trying to reform for 100 years that keeps killing us?
Yeah, this is exactly why I think there's a lot of folks who, understand it in terms of step by step, right? So, okay, maybe it starts with reforms, but when we think about like really ridding ourselves of a system that has not really benefited us, I mean, we do have to understand that there may be some, okay, somebody murdered someone, in a heinous way, serial killers or rapists, or, there's people that go to the extreme, right, when they're thinking about it. But really, statistics show is just what you said. There's a lot of folks that are in these jails, in particular King County Jail, that are really, they're unhoused. They're there for other reasons. Not saying that there's not people there who commit crimes, but also the idea and notion that just because you are seeking resources, as Michael Rowland was, that can land you in a jail cell. Yeah. I think people need to be more understanding of that fact, right? Yeah. And unfortunately, it's one of those things that doesn't hit a lot of people until it's immediate for them, right? Yeah. Until it's directly in their purview. They're either the ones that are experiencing it, or their family member or someone experiences it. It has to hit home oftentimes for people to start caring. And that for me is a big issue. Now, I was shocked. I mean, I just saw this TikTok release of, a brother, he had a cell phone in his hand, the police are there and they're like, on him, and they're yelling at him, and the lights are glaring on him. And his brother is like, hey, he's got a phone. And then all of the white neighbors start coming out. They're like, whoa, what are you doing? He has a phone. And they pan out, and lo and behold, it was Seattle police. And I went, wow, like somebody sent this to me that's outside of Seattle. And I just thought, my goodness, here we are again. There's so many different examples of how we do it wrong. And it wasn't until the white neighbor came up he said, do you want me to walk with you? And he said, yes, please. Because they had their guns drawn on him. He thought he was about to get murdered right there for having his cell phone in his hand. And it took the neighbors to stand in unity with him for the Seattle police to put their guns down, get back in their cars, and drive off. They didn't even take him. He wasn't, going to jail. What's up with this? Like, this is a perpetual culture that I think when we see it over and over again, Sade, it brings it to light.
It really does. And so what's interesting about policing is one of the first national conversations about it was the Wickersham Commission in like the 1929, 1930s early. And it was a national conversation, people saying, hey, our police on a national level are problematic. They're abusing people. They're planting, evidence on people. They're harming people. They're threatening people. They're harassing people. So this is not new, right? It's 2023 and we're still having the same conversations we're having, a century ago. And that should tell you that there's no iteration of policing that is going to be safe for people. And I really like that example that you gave, because at the end of the day, it was community members who kept community members safe. And that's really what it has to be. We have to invest in strengthening our communities and resources and developing those relationships. But what we're doing is we're outsourcing our protection to people who don't care about us, right? I mean, most of SPD, they don't even live in Seattle. They're from the suburbs, right? And so this is public funds paying their $150,000 a year average salaries, and that public money is going out of the county into the suburbs. It's going to different cities. Then so you're not even getting a return on your investment. And so, when our communities are being gentrified into extinction, when our schools are not getting funded the way that we want, like when is enough enough? And the fact that, Michael Rowland's case happened, the Tyree Nichols case happened, right? And we're just talking about nationally, even after the largest uprising in human history with the George Floyd protests in 2020, we're still seeing the same thing. After, a bunch of national reforms, people were, how many laws were instated, and we still keep getting killed. That should tell you that we have to do something different. And I know, I try to respect people's position because it's scary. It's like, well, if the cops aren't there, what's going to happen? Well, cops only, they only solve 2% of violent crime. 2%. So they're not doing what we think that they're doing. They're not giving, they're not doing what we give them credit for. And at the end of the day, like, we will keep each other a lot safer than police ever will. And we should, develop those conversations and become more and more comfortable with that.
Yeah. Every time I speak to you, I'm just so engaged. I'm so educated by the statistics that you share.
Yeah.
2%. They solve 2% of violent crime.
2%.
That's alarming, Sade.
I want to talk about the numbers too, Trae, about how much the money.
Give us more statistics.
So
we got the time.
Yeah. Okay. King County Council's budget for the jails is $498 million for the next 2 years. $498 million. Seattle City Council's budget invests over $20 million yearly into the jail, so that's $40 million over 2 years. King County Courts is $274 million over 2 years. King County Prosecuting Attorneys is $207 million. Public Defense is $169 million. And we have the Sheriff's Office, which is $481 million. We have SPD, which is $760 million. We have Seattle City Attorney's Office, $80 million. Municipal Courts, $83 million. So, that's over $1 billion. That's well over $1 billion, actually. And so we're really like, what are we talking about? You know what I mean? Like, imagine $1 billion in the communities. Imagine what Seattle would be like. We need public transportation. We need healthcare. We need resources. We need housing, right? There's a huge bill that's coming up, or initiative that's on the ballot coming up for Seattle housing, social housing. And we need to talk about that. We could do those things, but we keep burning money on policing when they're not even meeting the standards that they should.
Gosh, I mean, like, the hairs on my arm are standing up because, I think we move off of generalistics, right? So generally speaking, police are there to protect and serve. A lot of folks go, well, like you said, oh my gosh, what would we do without the police? People need to be educated on these numbers and really educated on the fact that, when we talked at such length and, people sharing and pouring their heart out after George Floyd, that George Floyd was an example.
Yeah.
But he wasn't the only one. There's so many different families who have been affected by the brutal violence that has come from police departments across the nation. And you are right. Yeah. Globally speaking, we are doing something that no other nation is doing. We are doing something in terms of that level of investment in our police force, the investment in our jails. The idea is that our jails have been privatized. So now there's people that have a stock style stake in the success of our jails, which means they have to house X amount of convicted people, X amount of folks that are accused of crime. They have to actually do that. It's become a business in a way that moves far away from the protect and serve model. And for so many folks, we now understand the origination of policing was through the slave trade, right? It was capturing those slaves that were just looking to free themselves, right? Looking to get out of those shackles that they knew it just wasn't right for them, never felt comfortable for them. And yet that's where our police force like stems from. So these numbers are just staggering, Sade. I mean, you're someone who lives in this all the time. What are some of the things that you do to like keep yourself afloat? Because it's a lot to take on.
My clients suffer through this, right? And so sitting across the glass from them or sitting across the table from them and talking to them about what they're experiencing in the jail has really been eye-opening, just in the constant trauma, right? I mean, there was a point in 2020 where the jail didn't have clean water. And so people had to, use bottled water. And it's like, how are you going to wash yourself with bottled water, right? There's just a lot of stuff that's going on. It's not just the harm that's going on. It's, they were freezing cold. It's freezing in the jail. It's filthy. And what's interesting, you mentioned the privatization of jails. The situation happens in public jails too, right? In public prisons too. In public prisons, they literally enslave people, pay them pennies on the dollar, and they create all types of goods that we consume every day in the public. And they get it at, nickels on the dollar, right? Pennies on the dollar. And that's exactly what slavery was, right? It's stealing your labor. And so that's what jails operate and prisons operate as. I mean, in the King County Jail, the trustees, they run the kitchen, they distribute goods, they do a lot of the labor inside of the jail, and they're getting paid $1, maybe a day, and so we're talking about extreme depravity that's happening, and it's just right up the hill. And so, slavery in the 13th Amendment, there's exception, except when you're charged with a crime. And we're seeing that every day. And so this stuff isn't over. It's just a continuation. It just changes shape. But I do want to talk a little bit about the disparities. I mean, in 2021, King County, they did an audit of the King County jails. The county was like, hey, let's look into this. They found that Black people served 40% longer terms in the King County jail than other people did. White people served 25% less time in the jail. Black people had worse disparities as far as discipline, got infracted more, had higher security housing, all of the things that we think we're like, man, this doesn't feel right. That's exactly what's happening. And the county literally posted this on their website. That's where I got the information. And so when we talk about what our electeds know, I feel bad telling people put pressure on your electeds. They know all this information already. They just don't act, and they need to be held accountable. Mr. Rowland should not be dead. His blood is on people's hands. His life is on people's hands, and those politicians need to be held accountable. They have a duty to the community, especially when they're wielding public funds, right? And they just don't do what they're supposed to do. And then every time somebody dies, they, I don't know, within the national level, taking a knee or whatever, but it's just all performative. And it's like, no, we're not going to do this anymore. We're not going to take this. We're not going to accept our community members being killed when they need help. So.
Sade, always so informative. I mean, we I want to make sure you get everything. And is there anything else please
So,
take it away.
50% of the youth that are locked up in King County are Black youth. Our young people, and we're 6, maybe 7% of the county. And I think that's in Seattle City. I think the county is even less. And so we're not just seeing this on the adult level, we're talking about our babies, right? And so that's what the King County jail system perpetuates. I want to make sure I don't miss anything. I do want to talk about a little bit about, Bruce Harrell's actions as mayor. There's been a lot of focus on the sweeps, right? There have been a lot of sweeps happening. And there was a lot of pressure from community when Jenny Durkin was in office about the sweeps, but Bruce Harrell got in office, and there's still a lot of people organizing around it. And again, I want to talk about how the King County Jail organizing, we're doing a shutdown the King County Jail campaign. But this is organizing that's been continuous for decades by Black and brown people, specifically the Black community, right? And so this is not a new movement, but people keep beating their fists against, the powers that be. But Bruce Harrell sitting there and investing all this money and sweeping away our homeless community members, paying, again, SPD offers $150,000 a year to do it. Well, how about it? You just give some of that money to people so they can be housed. You won't have these problems. And we have seen gentrification happen in the housing prices. I mean, Seattle housing it's ridiculous even on a national level, right? It's one of the most expensive cities in the country, and our city is changing. And the city that people grew up with, they can't even live here anymore. And then, so it's crazy to have unhoused people swept out and literally displaced, and all for the comfort of rich people. And that's what policing has always been. We talked about with the slave trade, right? Slave catchers, what were they doing? They were protecting the property interests of white, wealthy people. And so when we talk about Mr. Rowland, he goes in to a hotel downtown to get some food. SPD comes to drag them away, protecting the property interests of wealthy white people, right? So we have this continuation of a theme that when we are inconvenient or when we are not in service of white power, then we get taken to the jails, then we get displaced, and then we get harmed. And so I just want to point out that how problematic that is, and what, this is not something different than before 1865, right? We're dealing with this, it looks different, but it is the same death machine. And that's what prisons are. There's over 2.5 million people in prisons and jail in this country. It's obscene.
Sade, I appreciate you for bringing us the numbers and the statistics. And, I agree 100% that we need to be educated. And, this is why we talk about these movements, we can never really take our foot off the gas until we see some change that is felt by families of the global majority in general. Like, until those material conditions are elevated and until people actually are feeling that they belong here, we're going to continue to see these issues persist. I thank you for being on the front lines, as you always are. Of course, you have your law firm. For those who may not know, Sade is on it. Please make sure that if folks are really looking to connect with you or looking to maybe connect with the movements you were mentioning, look right there and let them know how they do that.
Yeah. So my website is thesmithlaw.com. Pretty simple, thesmithlaw.com. You can reach out there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sade. Always. It's been such a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh.